And we're live.
Ladies and gentlemen, honorable members of parliament, hello, and welcome to the third meeting of the MENA chapter under the theme Recovery in the MENA region, Designing Inclusive, Resilient, and Sustainable Policies. The chapter meeting is a parliamentary network initiative launched in 2016 to convene parliamentarians and IMF and World Bank representatives and experts to discuss common development issues for countries in the MENA region in an effort to strengthen international cooperation as well as transparency and accountability in multilateral development finance. At the launch of the first MENA region in 2016 in Tunis, we discussed how to overcome collectively challenges affecting youth and unemployment. In 2017 in Rabat, Morocco, the meeting focused on governance, migration, and education. Today, we meet virtually in 2021 to discuss some of the common challenges our countries in the region are facing amidst the COVID-19 pandemic, such as vaccines, governance, reforms, debt, and climate change. And before we start, I would like to thank an artist, Zara Fina Stasi, a visual artist and designer from New York, who will be drawing during our discussion and will show us at the end of this meeting a graphic representation with the main takeaways from the session. I also wish to thank the interpreters in different languages, the World Bank Group Parliamentary Engagement in the MENA region, the IMF, and the Parliamentary Network to make possible this third meeting of the MENA chapter. As parliamentarians, we have a crucial role to facilitate well-calibrated policies and stronger international cooperation to achieve a green and inclusive recovery in the region. Indeed, legislators are at the forefront of the pandemic, especially when it comes to ensuring the efficient and equitable distribution of COVID-19 vaccines, establishing clear communication with their constituencies, allocating budget in a transparent and accountable manner, as well as drafting policies for the future ranging from digital technologies, green economy, education, and creating jobs. So in this session, we will first listen to Mr. Farid Belhaj, Vice President, Middle East and North Africa of the World Bank, and Jihad Azur, Director of the Middle East and Central Asia Department of the International Monetary Fund. They will give remarks respectively on behalf of both institutions. They will be followed by presentations by four panelists, four members of parliaments from the region. And then we'll have the participation of a discussant, Dr. Nasser Saidi, founder and president of Nasser Saidi and Associates, former Minister of Industry and former Ministry of Economy and Trade in Lebanon, and also the first Vice Governor of the Central Bank of Lebanon. But before we start, I would like to specify something. Members in the audience, members of parliaments who wish to ask questions during this session can submit those questions into the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. And there will be time at the end of the session to address these questions. So before we give the floor to our panelists, we are interested in knowing what parliamentarians think about some main issues. So a questionnaire will appear on your screen, and you are kindly asked to take a minute to answer this questionnaire. Of course, your answers will be anonymous, and we will have two pools of questions during this session. So the first poll is, first question, in your view, what is the utmost priority for spending up recovery in the region? Is it fast vaccine rollout, strengthening regional cooperation and reducing trade barriers, increase social spending? So please take a little time to answer, and you can, of course, select one or several answers if you wish. So I suppose we had enough time to answer and select our responses before we move on to the opening of this session and give the floor to our panelists. So we thank you for your contribution. And now I'm pleased to introduce our first speakers, Jihad Azur, Director of the Middle East and Central Asia Department of the IMF, and Farid Belhaj, Vice President, Middle East and North Africa of the World Bank. My first question is for Jihad. What are the main challenges the region facing, what are the main challenges facing the region, and how has the IMF been supporting MENA countries since the eruption of the pandemic? This question is for Jihad.
Thank you very much, Naila. And also I would like to say hi to all the participants. Assalamu alaikum jami'an. And good morning to those who are in Washington, and good afternoon to those who are on the other side of the Atlantic. This is an important moment because this moment that we are gathered here today is a time where the region and the world are going through huge transformation. And I would like to tackle your questions by going over 3 points. One is understanding the moment. What are the challenges that the region is going through? Understand the priorities and align our actions. Understanding the moment, of course, we have gone through a monumentous crisis that has affected our lives, affected our economies, and also stressed our social and political systems. A year after the shock, what one could say very quickly is the region was able to respond and to respond rapidly to the first wave and the second wave of the pandemic by, on one hand, supporting lives, but also introducing certain number of measures to protect livelihoods. And the situation compared to other parts of the world seemed to be acceptable, even if we compare to some advanced economies. What have we learned from this year? We have learned many things. That one, it's very important to build confidence, and confidence is at the heart of what helped countries address this crisis. And confidence comes with clear policies, with the right governance, and also with a rapid response from authorities. The response was fast, and we saw over the first few months of the crisis, that almost the countries have responded by using the fiscal tool in terms of spending, as well as also in terms of providing some tax support, but also support through monetary and financial measures. Central banks also played a role. This has helped countries to limit the negative shock, but unfortunately the region endured negative growth for the first time since many decades. I would say since the Second World War, this was the largest economic and social shock to the region. Very quickly, we saw also the economy adjusting. We saw some interesting developments in terms of using technology, using new approaches of dealing and managing the crisis. But also we saw the challenges too. A high level of informality, the weak infrastructure had a big impact on the capacity to respond. The size of what I would say the space in policies also played an important role. Countries who have the fiscal space were able to respond bigger and faster, which helped them to recover faster in the second half of the year. Therefore, policies were very important at the heart, as we saw. Last point is the cooperation. And here we saw also a move in terms of increasing the level of cooperation between institutions and countries. For example, from the World Bank and the IMF side, both of us scaled up our support, and Farid will talk about that. The fund has immediately identified this as an important issue and mobilized $100 billion. The region was able to get $17 billion of support in 1 year, which is, to give you a magnitude of importance, is 60% of our outstanding engagement in 1 year. We helped several countries address the issue of the pandemic. For example, Tunisia got was the first country to get 100% of quota and rapid finance facility. Other countries like Morocco, Egypt, and others, we adjusted our programs to give them the space to respond, but also to stabilize their economy and to regain access to market, which was one of the main challenges. We saw also a greater cooperation with regional institutions, Arab Monetary Fund, Arab Fund for Economic and Social Development, which played an important role. And we are currently seeing a bigger movement in terms of coordinating the deployment of vaccine. Therefore, where we stand today is we stand at a point where recovery is here, but recovery is not as strong as one would expect for it to address in the long run the challenges of the region. We will grow at 4%, but this growth will be divergent. Some countries are at the forefront of vaccination and will recover faster than others, are facing the challenges of acquiring vaccines and vaccination, and in particular, those who are fragile or in conflict situation.
Thank you, Jihad. Thank you. Sorry, did you want to add something more?
No, my last point is to say this is a year of policies, and policies are going to play an important role. And this is a year of coordination. And during the spring meetings, we saw that ministers and governors of central bank were clearly identifying this as one of their new priorities. And therefore, I think this is the purpose of our discussion today with the parliamentarians, who play also an important role in policy setting, to see how they can play an important role in strengthening the response, strengthening the recovery, and accelerating the capacity of the region to address long-standing issues that existed before the COVID crisis.
Thank you, Jihad. Thank you. I'm sure that there will be a lot of questions at the end of this session. We have a long session of almost 15 minutes to answer questions about vaccines and many other subjects related to this crisis. Now I will ask a question to Farid. Farid, even before COVID-19, many countries in the region were grappling with many development challenges. I know the World Bank has mounted an exceptional response to this crisis. Can you share more about the work of the bank and your vision on how to build a truly sustainable, inclusive, and resilient recovery in our region? Thank you.
Thank you very, very much. Good afternoon, and to those who are overseas, and good morning to my colleagues here in Washington. It's great to be with you. Thank you, Naila, for managing this and keeping us honest. I'm really, really glad to be joined by my dear friend Jihad in today's conversation and of course by the parliamentarians. Parliament is playing, as you had mentioned, a very important role in setting policies, in moving forward, in our commitment to rise to the challenge that the people in MENA are throwing at all of us at this particularly sensitive juncture. Before coming here, I was in a conference call with my colleagues sitting in Gaza and in Jerusalem. And when you see what's happening there, you put things under kind of a relative light. As I was talking to colleagues in Gaza, the bombing were, you could listen, you could hear bombs being thrown at them in the houses and the displacement, etc. So I just wanted to put that on the table to say, this is a region that is unfortunately tormented by a large number of conflicts, tensions, and strife. And we need to take that into consideration as we are moving forward into our own development processes. What happened over the last 12 to 18 months is unprecedented. But what is now going on in our region has some to do with the COVID-19 crisis, but it has much more to do with very, very deep issues that our countries have not been tackling for years now. 10 years ago, in my own country, in Tunisia, we had something that was then called the Arab Spring. 10 years later, I'm wondering whether this decade was not, in fact, a lost decade for the Middle East and North Africa. We haven't seen progress. We have not seen governance becoming the rule of the game, because the Arab Spring started because of a flaw in the contract between the state and the citizens. And that contract is still flawed today. And this is where we need to be looking at today, the medium term and the longer term. This is where we should be looking at transparency, governance, rule of law. This is where our country should be going. And this is what the bank is pushing for. I would add to that climate, that is now an incredibly challenging situation, posing an incredibly challenging set of situations for us. Yesterday, we were having a discussion on the water scarcity in the Middle East and North Africa. It is incredibly urgent to tackle that particular issue. And unfortunately, we are not doing as much as we should. Now, looking at what the bank has done over the last 18 months to tackle the immediacy of the threat, the fierce urgency of now, as somebody who is much more famous than me said years ago. That fierce urgency, we tackled it through engaging very, very fast on putting on the table resources to push back against the poverty that was triggered by the COVID-19 crisis. So we put $2.5 billion in helping on the COVID-19 crisis. We rolled out social safety nets programs from Morocco all the way through all the countries of the Middle East and North Africa regions that asked for that. So we did it in Morocco, in Tunisia, in Jordan, in Egypt, in Lebanon, and other places. And those were very important because we felt that at that particular juncture, when people were feeling the brunt of the crisis, when people were losing their jobs because of the closures, when people were seeing that their governments, not all of them, but many of them, were not necessarily, acting in a rational way, well, those people needed help, and we moved extremely fast with all of these social safety nets program, bringing cash into people's hands and helping them move forward and look for another day. But this is really patching up the real issue. What we need is, as I mentioned in the beginning, and if you're looking at the medium and longer term, what we need is a real radical transformation of the relationship between the state and the government. And that can only happen if you open up governance, contestability of markets, rule of law. Let me give you one quick data. We are all familiar with the some of the questions that were asked by the Arab Monitor a few weeks ago. They were asked to see which country has gone up in terms of the trust between citizen and the state. Well, Morocco did amazingly well. And you know why? Because Morocco managed the COVID vaccination in an open, transparent, and efficient manner. So for the first time in many, many years, and I've worked on Morocco for many, many years, I saw this bridge in trust between the people and the government, which was interesting, not necessarily because of Morocco, because it showed that when the government is efficient or perceived to be efficient, the trust in the government by the people, spikes up very, very fast. So that's another call to our parliamentarians, because they are part of the overall government structure, to really look very carefully at being efficient, at moving forward fast, and at communicating with their constituency every single time they are adopting new policies. It is very, very important to keep that, and it helps us tremendously when we put on the table the resources that we have and the technical assistance that we provide to our countries. Thanks again, Naila.
Thank you, Farid. Before we move on, I will have one question for each one of you. And I will ask you to give us brief answers so we can keep the time for this session. Farid, you talked a lot about many challenges. We're facing many challenges. We have a high debt level in our countries now with this crisis. We also have to tackle the environmental change threat. And so I will turn to Jihad and ask him, what are the priorities to support the recovery, especially for countries with high debt burdens, and how to lay the groundwork for a more sustainable, inclusive, and greener economy? And I will add that with the last little question, I will ask you to answer shortly. Many initiatives have been taken for developing countries, but what about emerging countries? Thank you.
Should I start for Farid?
That's for Jihad.
Okay. Thank you very much. You are covering many issues, and I will try to be extremely brief, and therefore, please excuse me if I don't go into the details. Priority is for vaccination. The race between vaccine and virus is going to determine the speed of the recovery, the quality of the recovery, especially in many of our economies. Tourism services require the capacity to provide large range of vaccination. And we could accelerate growth by accelerating vaccination. Second, clearly removing the policy support that was introduced last year has to be done carefully. Countries who still have the capacity to expend it, they should. Those who have the fiscal space, those who don't have, they need to reprioritize. Three is a moment where we are at a crossroad. If we don't accelerate transformation, real economic transformation, we may address the COVID shock as the first impact of the shock, but we will miss the next decade. And therefore, it's the time to accelerate. This is a moment of acceleration and disruption, and we need to understand it. What does it mean? It means we need first to have the capacity to do it, therefore stability matters. And countries who have high level of debt need to take care of that, because debt has increased by on average 9% in a year, which is big increase. Second, we need to allow the countries to address some of the scarrings. And for example, we at the fund, we are using the SDR this year to provide additional liquidity support to countries that could be used to address vaccination, social, as well as also recovery issues. Social is going to be important. Farid rightly highlighted this issue. It's a moment where we need to scale up our social policies to build a new social framework that sustain the transformation we need. Unemployment went up. In your country, for example, Naila, it went up to 17%. In Jordan, it went up to 25%. It's an important issue to address, but we can transform this into one of the silver linings. Technology, green recovery are two avenues where we can create new growth opportunities. There are many other issues, but I would like to finish with one. It's a time where we need to have all the stakeholders working together. In a country where parliament and executive, but also the other forces of the nation, in the region, and regional cooperation is a new frontier for the region. We see this, and we are witnessing certain number of initiatives on that. Mobile money, environment, vaccination. Last but not the least, we as an international community also have a responsibility. And we intend to do it not only by providing additional financing, but also helping countries address some of their bottlenecks in terms of policies, but also bring the issues of the region to the worldwide community. We are in a mix of huge transformation. We need also our region to be well represented at the table of discussion and negotiation to charter the future for the next 5 to 10 years. And I'll stop here.
Thank you, Jihad. You talked about the necessity for stakeholders to work together and to accelerate. So my last question is for Farid, and I will ask you a brief answer. What should the social contract look like in the wake of COVID-19? And crucially, what role can international institutions like the World Bank play in helping countries?
Yeah, very good question. You know, the social contract for some time was based on a very simple equation. You know, the government gives you free goods and you basically don't interfere in political affairs. But that was 40, 50 years ago. Now the social contract is all about mutual responsibility. It's about the government being able to open the doors, to open wider the possibilities for citizens to be able to do their free enterprise, open the door to the private sector, reduce the role of the state in the economy, and making sure that the state becomes an enabler rather than a doer. So this is one part of the social contract. The other part of the social contract is for the citizen to take responsibility in their own hands, to stop waiting for the state to be delivering free goods, and to be able to engage and open up their own creativity. So there is a social contract, and as every single contract, you have two sides to it, and it has to be a dynamic one. Let me give you a quick number. By 2050, in the Middle East and North Africa region, we'll be looking at more than 300 million young people knocking at the door of the job market. Those 300 million new jobs shall not be provided by the public sector. There is no way. These jobs will be provided by the private sector, by innovation, by creativity, by getting into the new digital era, and by allowing the young people to expand their creativity, open the door, reduce the level of interference, I would say, of the state in the economy. This is really what we are talking about when we talk about this new social contract. I see some signs in some countries, but we are still far away from it. We need to keep pushing for it. Thanks, Ned.
Thank you, Farid. Thank you, Terry. Thank you. We really have to empower the entrepreneurial mindset in our countries and promote the private sector to create more jobs. I thank you both for these answers and these essential insights in view of this very special period due to the pandemic, which we all know will bring certain disruptions and need for anticipation. And now we're going to hear from 4 parliamentarians reflecting on their experiences and the most important measures to implement for building an inclusive and sustainable recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic in the MENA region. So as I am the timekeeper, I will really ask them to stick to the allotted time, which is 5 minutes per speaker. And we will start. We have a very perfect gender balance in this panel. And I will start with Honorable Ziad Ladari, who is a member of the Assembly of the Representatives of the People of Tunisia and former Minister of Development, Investment, and International Cooperation. And before that, he was Minister of Industry and Trade. Honorable Ziad Ladari, the floor is yours for 5 minutes.
Merci beaucoup, Neila. Et je suis vraiment ravi de retrouver aussi Farid et Jihad, avec qui j'ai eu le plaisir de travailler. Ils ont connu avec une autre casquette, celle de ministre et gouverneur auprès de la Banque mondiale pour la Tunisie. Et je suis ravi de retrouver aussi mes collègues, donc Neila, Mariam et Fedi. Alors, je vais essayer d'aller vite parce que le sujet est trop complexe et ça demanderait beaucoup plus de temps. Mais je dirais tout simplement que l'année 2020, les 2 années 2020-2021, c'est tout comme les années 2010-2011 ont été des années clés, des années cruciales pour la décennie qui a suivi. Et ce sont 2 crises majeures qui ont déclenché la décennie 2010-2011, comme celle de 2020-2021, une crise politique, ce que Farid a rappelé, ce que vient de rappeler, donc ce qu'on a appelé le printemps arabe, et la pandémie donc, du Covid en 2020-2021. Je serais peut-être plus nuancé que Farid pour dire que le terme un peu une décennie perdue serait peut-être un peu trop, je dirais, ne rendrait pas totalement justice à la réalité, puisqu'il y a eu quand même pas mal d'acquis. En tout cas, si je parle de la Tunisie, il y a quand même des acquis en termes de gouvernance démocratique, en termes de mise en place d'un certain nombre d'institutions, en termes de transformation de notre arsenal juridique pour le rendre beaucoup plus compatible avec, je dirais, les normes internationales et améliorer un certain nombre de lois de nature économique. Mais là où je le rejoins parfaitement, c'est que le coût de la transition pendant toute cette décennie a été effectivement très élevé. Le coût de la décennie a été très élevé, mais surtout que nous avons peut-être raté un peu le momentum de faire de ces grandes crises aussi de grandes opportunités et pour trouver là-dedans des ressorts pour rebondir de manière beaucoup plus forte et de trouver en fait le moyen de faire 2 grandes choses, refonder le contrat social, mais aussi revoir profondément, transformer notre modèle économique. Le contrat social qui a lié nos concitoyens pour les années post-indépendance ont été effectivement des années qui ont été marquées par un rôle de l'État accru dans l'économie et dans la société et une mutualisation, je dirais, des responsabilités qui n'a pas eu totalement lieu et que l'État jouait un rôle quand même prépondérant sur l'ensemble de la société. Je pense qu'aujourd'hui, il est temps de mettre à profit un peu ce moment crucial, cette année charnière, ce moment de transformation profonde pour revoir le contrat social dans nos pays, mais aussi pour revoir le modèle économique, pour mieux positionner notre région. Les indicateurs pour un pays comme la Tunisie sont des indicateurs très alarmants. 100% de la dette a atteint un niveau très inquiétant de 100%. Le chômage, 3 points de plus cette année. Un taux vraiment effarant pour le chômage des jeunes. On arrive à 40% dans cette phase post-Covid en Tunisie, un chiffre qu'on n'a pas connu depuis très longtemps. Et donc, pratiquement un jeune sur 2 maintenant est au chômage, ce qui est évidemment très inquiétant et très préoccupant. Je dirais que, pour finir, qu'aujourd'hui, ce qui serait vraiment souhaitable, qu'on mette à profit ce réseau, cette plateforme, pour travailler ensemble avec la banque et avec le fonds sur des nouvelles perspectives, les nouvelles dynamiques à enclencher dans la région, sur la refondation du modèle économique, mais aussi sur le contrat social, pour un nouveau pacte de développement économique et social, comme vous l'avez bien rappelé, résilient, fort, durable. Et je pense que c'est à notre portée si on arrive à mobiliser toutes les énergies et toutes les forces vives et travailler de manière, je dirais, plus étroite et en bonne intelligence avec la banque et avec le fonds, et derrière eux, évidemment, toutes les instances et toutes les banques de développement et toutes les institutions de développement au niveau mondial et bilatéral. J'aurai quelques pistes à développer par la suite dans cette discussion et comment on peut mettre à profit ce nouveau partenariat entre ce réseau et plus généralement entre nos sociétés et avec les instances de Bretton Woods et plus largement avec le milieu du développement. Et je reviendrai là-dessus plus tard avec plus de profondeur puisque je pense que d'épuiser le temps qui m'est imparti. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you, Honorable Ziad Ladari, for sharing your thoughts on the team that put this together today. And now our next speaker is Ms. Ibtisam Azawi from Morocco. Honorable Ibtisam Azawi is a member of parliament sitting at the Foreign Affairs Committee. She plays a prominent role as a civil society activist, information system engineer, and graduate of a master's degree from l'École Centrale Paris. Ibtisam is recognized for her intense parliamentarian work in Morocco, particularly on subjects such as youth entrepreneurship, the place of women in politics, and parliamentary diplomacy. Honorable Ibtisam Azawi, the floor is yours for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Glad and honored to participate at this third meeting of the Middle East and North Africa Regional Chapter of the Parliamentary Network on the World Bank and IMF to discuss and exchange views on how we can build an inclusive and sustainable recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic in the MENA region. Morocco's experience in addressing the negative effects of the pandemic was very successful. Morocco adopted strong security responses early, which helped in mitigating the public health threat at the onset of the coronavirus outbreak. All that contributed to significantly to softening of the pandemic's economic impact. Morocco's vaccinated population exceeds now 7 million, which is a result of the implementation of one of the most advanced vaccination programs in the MENA region. The financial data company Bloomberg released a month ago the Bloomberg Economics Ranking, which evaluates the economic recovery of 75 emerging market economics. The ranking places Morocco's economy recovery in the top 10 of the world. The expectations regarding the Moroccan economy to overcome the effects of the health crisis are projecting 4% to 5% recovery during the current year. This comes after much economic activity ground to a halt in 2020, leading to a drop in gross domestic product of more than 5%. Thanks to tax and monetary necessary measures taken by the government last year, Morocco has succeeded in returning to the path of growth. The economic recovery in Morocco is linked to the performance of the agriculture sector, to foreign investment, to oil prices, and to the current rates of Morocco uses in commercial exchanges. This crisis affected small and medium-sized companies, but government measures reduced this impact. Since the start of the pandemic, Morocco's professionals have hailed the government's support for the country's companies, which has helped many businesses absorb the economic shock. The crisis has created a turning point that necessitates the creation of sustainable models of growth and for the transformation of the Moroccan economy to be more able to face constraints and take advantage of all the positive all the possible opportunities. The focus on social dimensions was important. Steps were taken to bolster social protection in favor of the most vulnerable social categories, had been key to dealing with the social crisis caused by the pandemic. A few days ago, we voted at the parliament a bill that launches projects to widen the social security net and ease financial pressure on the country's working class. It's a huge project, a real social revolution. During the year 2021 and 2022, about 22 million additional people will benefit from compulsory health insurance, which include which include the same basket of treatments covered by the National Social Security Fund for private sector employees, with also the expansion of the base of people involved in the pension system in 2025 to include people who do work and do not benefit from any pension. Moreover, compensation for job loss will become general in 2025 to include everyone who held a permanent job. To sum up, the coronavirus crisis must be considered as an opportunity for more innovative future and for more solidarity and cooperation between the countries of the MENA region, and more collaboration and a better governance in collaboration with all the concerned stakeholders. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ibtissam, for this very interesting intervention and for highlighting a very important reform in Morocco, that is the generalization of the social security for all the population in Morocco, which is a real revolution and a very, very important decision made by the King of Morocco. Thank you for highlighting that. So now I give the floor to Honorable Fadi Alame, a member of the Parliament of Lebanon, who sits in the Health, Labor, and Social Affairs Committee and is also a board member of the Economic and Social Council. Fadi Alame is the chair of a private hospital group and president of the Arab Hospital Federation. Honorable Fadi Alame, you have our full attention for 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Naila. Dear speakers, panelists, and organizers, Lebanon, and it's not a big surprise, Lebanon is currently facing economic, fiscal, and monetary problems going back, unfortunately, a few years prior to the pandemic. Besides defaulting on its Eurobond payments and massive debt restructuring, debt to GDP stood at 150%. That was towards the end of 2019. So that was way earlier before or at least by the start of the COVID-19. COVID-19 presented serious threats. As policymakers, we pursued a legislative and oversight roadmap towards survival and later on towards recovery. Along a three-way approach, first keeping society healthy by strengthening the health system to accommodate infected patients. Second, to supplement lockdowns by providing social safety net programs. And third, to focus on ways and means to support the economic recovery, a big challenge. On the health front, we firmly believe in the notion that says good vaccine policy is good economic policy. Accordingly, we pushed forward the emergency use vaccine law and ratified an agreement with the World Bank to fund in excess of 3 million jobs over 2021. We started with 2 million, and now I think between June and July, we're gonna increase it by 1 million vaccines. As part of our oversight role, we realized, and this is a serious problem, COVAX did not comply with its commitment of 2 million vaccines, thus derailing the vaccination process. Massive global lobbying is needed to assist COVAX in its mission of equitable vaccine distribution. As to hospitalization, Parliament approved a World Bank health package legislation amounting to $120 million. Part of it was diverted towards acquiring PPEs, ventilators, and so on. Currently, I'm coordinating efforts with the Cabinet, World Bank, and Syndicate of Private Hospitals to secure a financial assistance program ensuring healthcare sector sustainability for the coming 3 years. On the social programs front, Parliament passed a social safety bill presented by the World Bank worth $246 million, benefiting close to 147,000 households, or close to 800,000 individuals. The approved bill is waiting for the implementation decrees, and this is the issue in Lebanon. Again, we pass laws, but they never get implemented. Hopefully the business of local politics won't be late. Our biggest challenge remains focused on the economic recovery, given the recession we had prior to the pandemic. besides passing a basket of reform-oriented bills, such as anti-corruption, money laundering, right of access to information, forensic audit, plus few others, and with more in the pipeline, such as central procurement, fair competition, and capital control laws. Again, timely implementation is the big challenge. On the road to economic recovery, deadline extensions and tax waiver approved legislations are not strong enablers of a sustained economic recovery and job creation. We all agree on that, but we have to do it. It's a quick fix. Instead, the country needs to start negotiations with the IMF, commit to debt restructuring and rescheduling, and negotiate with Eurobond issuers and holders alike in order to bring back credibility and transparency to the Lebanese system. Finally, investments in infrastructure and green recovery-oriented projects through the PPP law is a must towards job creation. Someone mentioned the role of the private sector. We're firm believers that we should give this private sector a massive role in rebuilding the economies that we have. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Honorable Fadia Lamé. I pointed out two things you said that are very important: PPPs to promote private sector, and also one statement I'm sure everybody in this audience will agree on is that laws are adopted, they're voted, but not always implemented. So now we will give the floor to our last speaker from Parliament, our fourth speaker, who is Honorable Mariam Bentanaya from the United Arab Emirates. Mariam Bentanaya ranked #1 in the Federal National Council elections in 2019 to be the first woman to be elected for the Emirate of Dubai after the empowerment decree issued by the President of the United Arab Emirates, declaring that 50% of the Federal National Council members should be women. Honorable Mariam Bentanaya, the floor is yours, and thank you.
Thank you. Excellencies, honorable colleagues, it's a pleasure to gather with you virtually on this occasion, and a great honor to be here today on behalf of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Mediterranean. First, allow me to thank the World Bank Group and the IMF for providing a platform to discuss such critical issues for the MENA region. More than 12 months ago, the COVID-19 outbreak disrupted our lives and our country's economies. This crisis is putting extreme pressure on economic growth, social and financial stability. The most vulnerable groups of our societies and those countries who had the most fragile economies at the beginning of the pandemic are facing unprecedented levels of employment, the upsurge of poverty rates, and even the risk of major food crisis. Today, our task as policymakers is substantial. We need to develop effective and forward-looking solutions to address the economic and social cost of the pandemic. In front of us, we have a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to redefine our production models. We need recovery plans that assign a premium to inclusivity and environmental protection. 3 strategic policy areas should be at the center of our strategies. First, the protection and rehabilitation of small and medium enterprises. In our region, SMEs serve as a primary employment providers for women, youth, and groups at risk of marginalization. The failure rate of these enterprises has increased by 9% compared to pre-pandemic levels. The failure prioritizing stimulus packages to mitigate liquidity shortages for SMEs will strongly contribute to preserving jobs and income sources, especially for the most vulnerable shares of our economic fabric. In support of these efforts, PAM promotes public-private partnership to sustain SMEs and fosters coherent legislative frameworks to stimulate local and foreign investment across the region. Moreover, the Assembly, through its economic panel, is partnering with major international financial institutions to implement the Startup Market Project, an initiative intended to facilitate access to alternative capital markets for startup and SMEs in the Euro, Mediterranean, and Gulf countries. Second, the revival of the tourism industry. Tourism and cultural heritage represent a vital pillar for a full economic recovery in the region. Before the pandemic, the sector accounted for more than 11% of regional GDP. The economy of several MENA countries is still critically dependent on it. Only targeted financial policies and strong coordination between our countries can guarantee the rehabilitation of this industry. To this aim, PAM activated a special task force dedicated to tourism. This sectoral group closely cooperates with the United Nations, World Tourism Organization, and the World Travel and Tourism Council to ensure that parliamentarians receive timely information on trends and best practices for a rapid and sustainable relaunch of tourism across the region. Third, the transition toward climate neutrality. MENA countries are a hotspot for climate change. The impacts of environmental degradation and resource scarcity are already tangible. Recovery plans are an extraordinary occasion to put the region on track to meet the objectives of the Paris Agreement, creating new jobs and business opportunities. A green reboot based on innovation, circularity, and decarbonization is the only chance we have to mitigate the ongoing climate emergency. For this reason, PAM firmly advocates for a carbon added tax and for ending fossil fuel subsidies. Moreover, the Assembly is supporting member parliaments for forwarding ambitious nationally determined contributions. Dear colleagues, delivering effective recovery strategies require two additional key elements. One, capillary vaccine campaigns in our countries. PAM is at the forefront in promotion of international cooperation and solidarity actions to guarantee equitable access to vaccines for all Euro-Mediterranean and Gulf countries. Two, solid financing strategies. In this framework, Islamic finance displays great potential for a social responsible relaunch of our regional economies. With all this in mind, PAM will continue to collaborate with its excellent partners, including the World Bank and the IMF, to facilitate dialogue among parliamentarians and experts and promote science-based recovery strategies. Only by joining our efforts and combining sustainability and inclusive policies, we can defeat COVID-19 and achieve a transformative and resilient revival of the MENA economies. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Honorable Tenaya Mariam. I thank you all for your interventions and for respecting the allotted time. And before we give the floor to our discussant, we will proceed to another brief poll. A second questionnaire will appear on your screen, so you can see it now. And the question is, in your view, what is needed to strengthen good governance and build institutional trust in the MENA region? Is it to strengthen legislation, to strengthen the legislation to rule the rule of law, promoting more open and inclusive approaches to designing policies and services, improving public communication, building safeguards to fight corruption? So I repeat, legislation to strengthen the rule of law, promoting more open and inclusive approaches to designing policies and services, improving public communication, building safeguards to fight corruption. So please take a few seconds to respond to this questionnaire. And of course, once again, you should know that your answers will be anonymous. And you also remember that you can choose one or various answers if you wish. And now we're going to move on to our next part. And we're going to listen to Dr. Nasser Saidi. And as I said when introducing this meeting, Dr. Saidi is a former minister. He has held important positions in other positions in Lebanon, and also has an impressive international career, especially on the economic and financial scene. He is the founder and president of Nasser Saidi and Associates, who advises governments, central banks, international financial institutions, regulators, banks, companies, and so on. So he's also a former chief economist and head of external relations at the Dubai International Finance Center Authority, where he has established and developed the external relations with financial institutions such as the IMF, the OECD, IFC, and World Bank. Dr. Saidi, we would like to hear you react to the different statements we have heard today, and also on the theme that brings us together today, how to restart growth. And the floor is yours for 7 to 8 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And this is really a very auspicious occasion. I'm joining a number of friends, both Farid and Jihad, and as well as a number of others. So let me first retain a couple of important messages, I think, from what Jihad and Farid were saying. The first point, I think, is that this is unprecedented a shock. We have not had as big a shock since World War II across the economies of the region, whether they're oil producers, labor exporters, or oil importers. I think that's point number one. Point number two is that we need to build confidence. Whenever you have shocks like this means that policymakers, as well as parliamentarians, and I'll be addressing a lot of remarks towards parliamentarians, need to review their priorities. The third point, I think, is that we've learned to use technology, particularly when we've responded to COVID, through vaccination programs and the rest, and making sure it is contained. But I think at the same time, I think the most important message of all is that this is a time for structural change. This is a time for really deep transformation of our economies. And it has to do with the social contract that Farid mentioned, as well as Jihad, but also addressing already deep problems that we've had from the past. And let me mention very quickly what those are, lest we forget them. First, we have some of the highest unemployment rates in the world. And our demographics are not in our favor. We need to be creating hundreds of millions of jobs by 2030. And it is very clear that we cannot have those jobs being created in the public sector. That is a dead end. In addition to that, not only is unemployment a big problem, but we have the highest degrees of inequality and among the highest degrees of poverty in the world. So when we look forward, it's not a matter of how do we recover from COVID. We will recover from COVID eventually, it'll take time. But what we need to think of is what are the structural changes and structural reforms that are required to address issues like poverty and inequality. And those have risen because of COVID. The final two items I think that need to be on our agenda, and we've discovered those during COVID, is that we don't have automatic stabilizers. Many developed countries and advanced economies have automatic stabilizers, right? You've got unemployment insurance, taxes go down, other expenditures to cushion you increase. We don't have automatic stabilizers in most of the countries in the region. The second thing is that our expenditure on social protection is very low. If you look across the Arab states, it's about 2.5% of GDP. A bit higher in North Africa, around 7%, 7.5%. But we're way below world average in terms of social protection. And the final thing which hurts is informal markets. Our labor markets are highly informal. Some estimates are that 65% of employment in our region is in informal markets. What do we mean by informal markets? It means that people don't really have access to much of the social protection. They wouldn't have access to social security, to unemployment insurance and others. So they become extremely vulnerable. And the category which is most vulnerable, of course, is women. Not only are they employed, if they are employed in low-paid jobs, but most of them work in the informal sector. So they get hurt the most when you have a big shock like COVID. So addressing this issue of informal markets, and it's not just labor markets, it's overall business, has to be addressed. So what are the sort of structural changes that we need to be thinking of? To my mind, and this has been mentioned by several of our speakers, the number one priority, I think, when we look forward, and as parliamentarians, we need to look beyond just 1 year. We need to look for the next 5 or 10 years. The first one, I think, and Farid pointed to this, is climate change. The risks of climate change for our region are very high and they're rising. It's not just about water, it's about desertification, it's about air pollution. And we need to address those right away. They need to feed into budgets. And once we talk about climate change and addressing climate risk, we need to talk about decarbonization policies. And as soon as we talk about decarbonization policies, the first thing that comes is the issue of subsidies. We have some of the highest subsidies in the world for fossil fuels. We're encouraging a lot of energy use, which pollutes our atmosphere, increases mortality rates. So that is an area where we need to think of reducing the subsidies. And therefore, as part of overall decarbonization, we then use that reduction in subsidies for investment in the green economy. And investment in the green economy invites participation by the private sector. That is a major area as we move forward. But it also means devoting funds for the green economy, thinking about green bonds in Sukuk, blue bonds in Sukuk. So that has got to be high on our agenda. A third item is digitalization. We are now learning the power of digitalization, and we need to invest very heavily in digitalization. That means we have to reorient expenditures away from things like subsidies, if we're talking about public spending, away from non-targeted subsidies towards digitalization, broadband, etc. But increasingly on training of people, training our people for the next challenges as they come along. And of course, following that, it means our focus needs to be on the private sector. This has been mentioned, and this is critical to my mind. But the implication, of course, is that we need to rethink the size of our public sectors, the efficiency of the spending. And when we think about the size of the public sectors, we need to address two issues. I mentioned subsidies already, fossil fuels, non-targeted subsidies, but we also need to think of the size of the public sector, which absorbs a lot of employment. This is dead end. It serves as a cushion when you have a shock, right? People don't get thrown out, but it also means that you're not innovating. You're not introducing new technology. You're not going into new sectors. And so we have got to make some hard choices about how do you reduce the size of the public sector, and in particular, I think the size of the armed forces. We never talk about that, but the military in our region is disproportionate in terms of size. So we need to address that. How do you address that? Now, moving forward, another item I think that has been brought up is the issue of regional cooperation. In fact, we have very little regional cooperation. Most of the regional cooperation that we have comes through the IMF and the World Bank. They force us to work together. We need to think about how we build our own institutions at a regional level. We have not done that. If you look at our trade agreements and our investment agreements, we're not doing much to cooperate among each other. So that's going to be a priority moving forward. The other item I think that has to be high on our agenda is investment in public health and education. If you look at the Global Health Security Index, which ranks countries of where they stand in terms of health security, and it's not just the public health system, we rank below the world average. Some countries do better. UAE does well. Morocco does well. It's about the average, but many other countries, Lebanon and the others, are way below. The UAE is higher on the index. And I don't want to mention the situation in Yemen, Syria, and other countries Iraq, where you have violence, Sudan, and destruction. They rank very, very low. So parliamentarians need to focus on health security in its all multiple dimensions, because we're going to face more pandemics, we're going to be facing climate change, and we need to address that. And finally, I think this issue of digitalization needs to loom very large. It needs to imbue all our activities. It means transforming government so that most services are digitalized. That is a tool to fight corruption, and we need to face that. So moving into the digital economy means transforming government, reducing its size, making it much more effective, and also promising our children, our youth, a new avenue, a new channel through digitalized activities. And the final thing I think on our agenda is anti-poverty. If you look at a country like China, it has, of course, been the champion and pioneer in reducing poverty. We need to think of learning from China, or what it has done in terms of anti-poverty funds, moving people away from areas where there is no future for them. So all of that, I think, has got to be on our agenda, and much of it, as I say, is structural changes that are required. So let me end there. And with one final message, I fully agree with what Fareed was saying, and Jihad as well. The main issue is an issue of governance, of transparency. Parliamentarians need to focus on holding governments accountable. We have not done that in our region. And the issue of rule of law is the critical one. Nobody is going to invest as long as you have high levels of corruption, as long as you have government contracts being given to cronies and the rest. That has to be our number one priority. So you're not going to be able to have a new social contract in place until you address this issue of good public governance, transparency, disclosure, and accountability. That has to be key to everything. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saidi, and for this very excellent conclusion. You're totally right. We have to be more, to hold our governance more accountable. We have to be more stronger with our governments.
Aggressive.
More aggressive. We're struggling hard. It's not always very easy. We have democracies under construction, and I think we're going much better. So before we move on to the next session of questions and answers to the questions, we will show you the answers to the poll of questions you have answered. So as you can see on your screen, so the first question about how to speed up the recovery in the region, obviously almost 50% of our audience voted for the first question, which is to fast the vaccine rollout, and which is absolutely normal, because even when Honorable Mariam Ben Tanaya spoke about recovering in terms of economy in tourism also is totally related to the vaccines. And as far as we don't have all access to the vaccines, it will be really hard to travel from a country to another. So this is what the first one. So can we see? So
the second one is on
screen is on the screen. So for this second poll, we have 65% of the last answer, which is building safeguards to fight corruption. So that is absolutely not a surprise. We definitely have to work on that harder to have more transparency, more accountability, and fight against corruption. And we all agree on that. So thank you very much, to the technical team for showing us the results of these pools. And now we're going to start the discussion part for about 40 minutes. And we are going to introduce the questions of the audience. So the first question is for Jihad and comes from Honorable Rida Faraj from Bahrain. And the question is, the pandemic has induced considerable additional expenses on developing countries, and national debts has reached increasingly high level. Considering that developing countries have to balance repaying their debts and sustainable growth, what kind of plans are being designed to help these countries by developed countries and the IMF?
Thank you, Naila. This is a very, I would say, important issue now for policymakers. Let me start by saying countries are different, and therefore there is no one single policy recommendations for all of them. Those who have the capacity and have reserves, they can still, I would say, address the two priorities, which is extend additional fiscal support in order to manage better the stabilization and the recovery, and therefore have more space for that. And those who did it last year had the capacity to recover faster. And those who don't have those resources, they need to prioritize their expenditures. Priority number one should remain healthcare issues, vaccination, medical capacity. Priority number two should be in helping sectors and activities that were faced with deep scarring during the crisis. And priority number three is to help by expanding social spending, as Nasser was also highlighting a few minutes early, in order to address the issue of inclusion, especially for youth and women, because the crisis showed us that those groups faced the difficulty in adjusting to remote working environment. But at the same time, addressing the debt issue is a must, especially that the debt has increased globally, but for countries in the region, maybe more than others. What needs to be done? To be very vigilant. Markets are still offering and opening now with low interest rate and liquidity, but this may change in the 18 months or 2 years to come. Therefore, it's the time to start preparing by policies, but also by reforms. Policies is to put the fiscal on a sustainable track through fiscal consolidation, but also institutional, deepening the markets of debt, diversifying the source of funding, especially that in the last year they have relied further on their local banks, which could create a pressure on the recovery, because with the limited capacity of banks to finance the recovery. Therefore, it's the time to accelerate those reforms. Last but not the least, I think we are all converging that without accelerating growth in the next 5 to 10 years, it's very difficult, and those policies will be very painful. And this is the right time. I think we are all converging that it is an opportune time. It's a must today to accelerate some of the transformation that we all have highlighted. Economy could grow and could grow fast. Technology is helping. Green transformation is an opportunity, and the capacity and the resources we have with the young population, it's a blessing. Two, policies matter, and this is the role of not only the executive and legislative, and I would like to hear from the parliamentarians how they see their role. Last but not the least, I think we have now to think how the global economy is also going to adjust. And this is the dimension that we did not cover earlier in our discussion. The global economy is changing. Value chains are changing. The way we supply and we produce is changing. And the region need to adjust to that too. And faster you do it, faster you recover and growth will come.
Thank you, Jihad. Thank you very much. I have a question now for Farid from Honorable Hatimi Rita from Morocco. And the question is, the economic and social repercussions of the pandemic affect women more than men, especially those who work in the informal sector. How can we help them to get out of this situation? Also, how can we reduce the informal economy in developing countries in order to eliminate the vulnerabilities of those working in the informal economy and lack social protection as a result?
Thank you. Great question, and it has various angles to it. The gender angle and the social protection angle. And the latter is basically goes across gender. It's not just women, but on the gender dimension, you know what's really terrible and striking in the Middle East and North Africa? It's true in Morocco as well. Women are much better educated if you look at the outcome, at the academic outcome, than men. But then, if you look at the number of women who are now active on the job market, it is dismally bad, low. I look at Jordan, for instance. About less than 20% of women are part of the labor market, and it's more or less the same number all across the Middle East and North Africa region. But then again, when you look at the academic performance, it is higher than that of men, and this is a tension that we need to keep pushing. So now, as the World Bank, we have our gender engagement. I hate to say strategy. It is a concrete engagement where for each one of our projects, each one of our financing, we bring a gender tagged dimension to the project, making sure that women have a direct or get a direct positive impact out of bank financing. It is important, and it is, our institutional view. It is my personal commitment. If anything, at the end of my turn as a vice president for MENA, if there is one thing that I'd like to achieve, it's exactly that. And to go there, and I may be rubbing some feathers here, we also need to look at very old and tired rules, very old and tired traditions. We need to push the boundaries and to make sure that women have access to the job market, have access to economic activities, have access, above and beyond what is now available. I wouldn't go into much details right now because some of the issues are very, very sensitive, but we need to look at ways of opening the door for women, including possibly the whole discussion about succession. It is an important one, and we need to discuss it. So this is one. Second, when it comes to social protection, both for women and for men, we have a real problem in the Middle East and North Africa. Not only is it that, generally our social protection funds are not doing that great, wherever they exist, by the way, because in some countries it is basically budgetized. But also, what we see happening is that because of the informality that you mentioned, a large number of our citizens, are not at all eligible to this. So one way of moving ahead, and we have a very strong program on that, one way of moving ahead is to try to get into the whole, formalization of the informality, taking into or putting on the table the social protection dimension, making sure that people can see an incentive into getting into the formal sector through social protection, and that would help, obviously, a large swath of the population feel more secure as they move forward. We have, and I will finish with this, we have a very important piece of analytical work that we are going to be suggesting and proposing and launching at the Marrakesh annual meetings in about a year and a half. That would actually look at the future of social protection in the Middle East and North Africa. Between now and then, we will be holding workshops and consultations with all stakeholders, with you parliamentarians as well, so that we can get your input. Because we know that, as Jihad mentioned earlier on another issue, it's not a one-size-fits-all discussion. Each country has its own parameters, and we need to make sure that we address those in the most efficient way and manner. Thank you.
Thank you, Farid. And of course, if one of our panelists would like to react to what has been said or to one of these questions, Dr. Nasseri or one of the members of parliament who are on the panel, of course, you can raise your hand and and take the floor. I have one question for both of you, Jihad and Farid, that concerns the rating agencies. Logically, they should make the effort to take into account the exceptional circumstances of this pandemic to review their criteria, at least temporarily. Do the World Bank and the IMF work on this matter to sensitize them in this direction? Can you tell us about this?
This is for Jihad, I'm sure, but I'm happy to engage
I
as
see
well.
he's not hurry to answer.
Well, Naila, one, rating agencies are independent, and then the fund and I'm sure the bank too don't interfere in their work. What we have tried to do last year is to expand and accelerate our analysis on the various issues that the region and the countries are facing. A few weeks ago, we have launched a study on debt and debt management issues, whereby we explain the structure of the debt, the dynamic, and what are the policies to address one of the main issues that the countries of the region are facing. We have also provided in-depth analysis on some of the key issues. What are the sectors that are lagging in the recovery? And we discovered, not with any surprise, that small companies, informal sectors, tourism sector were the most affected, and therefore directed our analysis in order to provide timely policy response, but also highlight the importance of those issues. Last but not the least, this year, as you know, after last year, where we have mobilized tremendous and quick support that helped countries like, for example, Egypt, Morocco, and others, Jordan, to have a rapid access to market. And some of them were very successful in re-accessing market by providing the support on the RFIs, the rapid facilities, and also on normal programs and adjusting those programs. This year, the utilization of this special drawing rights that would benefit the countries of the region, and where also we are recommending to countries of the region who will have excess of SDRs to provide additional support to countries who don't, is a priority. And by also highlighting where the immediate priorities are, I think we still need to finance and expand the access to vaccine. We are also need to develop a greater initiatives to expand the transformation, be it on the social. Nasser was referring to a study that we did early this year, that the social spending have improved, or social indicators, in the last 2 decades, but we are still very low and below with 2.5%. This has to be addressed. And without transforming the economy, without developing new infrastructure of the whole social system, can't be done. And we saw in other crises, like, for example, the 2008 crisis, that when we delay the response, we delay the recovery too. And this is an issue that costed the region that in the last decade, we did not attract enough FDIs. My last point here is on the issue of women's participation and regional coordination. We did a study 2 years ago that showed that if we reduce the gap, and through financial inclusion of women's participation in the economy, $1 trillion of output can be created in the next decade. $1 trillion output. If we reduce the barriers that exist between, for example, Maghreb countries, you can have an additional 1% of growth in a market of 100 million consumers. And you can reduce tremendously the level of unemployment by creating additional flexibility in the labor market, as we saw recently in the GCC, who have done a tremendous job over the last few months in reforming their labor market. I think we have in the middle of a great, great moment, and we need to seize it all. And we need to work together, all of us, in order to make this transformation successful.
Thank you, Jihad. I have another question for you from Jordan, from Honorable Khalid Abdallah. How can the IMF play a role with donor countries and international institutions to provide more grants and loans to countries like Jordan so that they can overcome challenges such as high unemployment, high poverty rates, and a decline in economic activities to advance economies and achieve sustainable development?
Well, very quickly on Jordan, we have immediately after the crisis adjusted the program we had in order to give Jordan more flexibility on social spending. And this year we are going to increase the size of the program to allow Jordan to keep on the reforms that they have introduced in the last year or so, despite the very challenging environment, to reduce cost of labor, to reduce cost of energy, and to increase the opportunities for youth and women in the market. But to broaden a bit this question, in countries like Sudan, for example, where 2 days ago, we were able to mobilize the international community to provide huge economic transformation through the debt relief, $65 billion of debt relief. We did this last year for Somalia, whereby with this big transformation, we will allow countries who are currently in a very vulnerable situation to get access to finance. Our aspiration this year to do the same to Yemen, and also when Lebanon is ready to do the same thing for Lebanon too. Therefore, we see our role as one of the player in a big orchestra where we, regional institutions, bilateral donors, as well as also the stakeholders on the ground who lead, in fact, this transformation, we could provide the best and the most coordinated support.
Thank you, Jihad. I have a question and either one of you can answer it. Can you share a little more, maybe both of you, about how the World Bank and the IMF are supporting MENA countries with the procurement and distribution of vaccines?
Okay, maybe
Farid could start.
Yes, a quick word on that. But let me first say one word on this whole rating agency issue. Building on what Jihad mentioned, of course, they are totally independent. But one could think that adding into their data set issues related to human capital and the wealth of human capital in a particular country, that would show that that country possibly would be more attractive in the medium and longer term to investment. Possibly adding the issues of climate and sustainability. That also could be part of a conversation that would show that a particular country would be more attractive to investment, and that would help the clients of these rating agencies make the right decision. In terms of vaccination, what we have done is two levels. One, as I mentioned earlier, we have delivered financing for the equipment and respirators, oxygens, etc., that allowed countries to go through while the vaccines were being developed. Now that the vaccines have been developed, we have started financing the procurement of vaccines. The first one we did was in Lebanon, by the way, where the bank has re-engineered an existing health project, and we put on the table $34 million for the acquisition of vaccine. At the time, it was the Pfizer vaccine. So we did it, and we are doing it in a number of other countries. Tunisia, we have put on the table $100 million for the acquisition of vaccines, and we are rolling it out in a number of countries. In Jordan, in Iraq, we have a good conversation with the government. So we are happy to move and do it, but we need to be extremely prudent there and making sure that those vaccines that we are helping procure are the ones that have been vetted by the WHO and by regulatory agencies around the world that have a standing, high standing reputation. So we are there. We are moving ahead with this, and we really hope that when we put the money behind the vaccines, like in Tunisia, they actually go ahead, ratify the financing convention, and move ahead and start procuring ASAP. Because as we all know, if there's one thing, and you mentioned it earlier in your poll, that people feel is going to be triggering a new wave of economic recovery, it is people being vaccinated.
Thank you, Farid. I think you, Dr. Saeed, Nasser Saidi, wanted to react on something that was said.
Actually, I wanted to come back to this issue of women and youth, and just to remind ourselves about new technology. Digitalization, I think, has to be high on the agenda of parliaments and governments. Why? Because we've seen that you can introduce it into payment systems and banking and financial services that can reach out to communities, women and youth very easily. So that means you can deliver government services very effectively using modern technology. And that means you really improve inclusiveness using technology. So I think we need to come back to that time and time again. And I want to insist on this because I think this is a time at which we've got to transform government, and most government services can become provided digitally. When I look at the UAE, to take that example, something like 85% to 90% of government services are now available on a mobile phone. We should be able to do that across the Arab world. And I think this combination of focusing on decarbonization, i.e. looking at lowering the carbon footprint, investing in renewable energy, and at the same time digitalizing our economies is the perfect combination to address issues like transportation, urban development, cities, and all the rest, and therefore opening up for the private sector. I think we have to put those as priorities. Digitalization plus green economy have got to go together. And if we do that, then we have the promise really of creating jobs for our young people, but including women much more effectively. So I think we really need to focus on that. And at the same time, it allows you to develop resilient infrastructure. We're spending enormous amounts on infrastructure, but much of it is old technology. We need to move towards intelligent, resilient, climate resilient infrastructure. And this is the time to do it. And it's a perfect opportunity. So really, I think parliaments should really be focusing on that and asking their governments, what are you doing about climate change, decarbonization, digitalization, digitalizing government services? I think those are critical things to my mind. Thank you.
Thank you, Nasser. And this is...
I raised my hand.
Yes, of course.
Yeah.
I just wanted to add to just what said right now, Dr. Nassiri, because I have a question from a member of parliament that is how to encourage technological innovation. So what he just said is really important. We're all aware about that, but the question is how to do it.
Absolutely. And yeah, thank you. Thank you very much for your contributions. I would like to insist on some point because it is really important that we do not reproduce the same errors of the past in terms of handling this crisis. And I think that promoting new ways of reflection, action, and even communication is really important now to be able to handle the major shock we are living today. So my point is actually to insist on the importance of having a more long-term focused strategies and policies to be able to handle this major crisis, but also to be able to offer a new vision for the future for our people and especially for our youth. Just recently, our government presented a new program to the IMF, to new reforms program. And personally, my main critic to this program is that is really focusing on this very short term and this very short run approach and completely neglecting or ignoring the importance of having a global vision for the future. This new roadmap for economic and social reforms in the country should be integrated in more global vision for the whole country and also for the whole region in terms of position, how to position Tunisia in the region and more globally in the new world emerging after the pandemic. Taking the government accountable, holding the government accountable, as Mr. Saidi has just, Nasser Saidi has just said, is very important for us as a parliamentarian, and we will organize tomorrow a dialogue in Parliament with the governor of the central bank as well as with the Minister of Finance. And for me, it is really important for both of them to hear from us and to hear for our need, for this strong need, I would formulate, to offer for the country a long-term vision. Just 3 years ago, I participated in the Human Capital Development Summit organized by the World Bank in Bali, and one of the major points I highlighted is really this: how to concentrate and to focus and to care about long term, because the pandemic and the risk for actually focusing on recovery is to continue all the time concentrating and focusing on the different problems of protecting lives. It's really important, vaccines, oxygen and other issues, but completely neglecting this really strategic vision we should offer to our people. And my hope is also that the World Bank and the IMF would use them, I would say, very frankly and friendly, less diplomatic wording and less diplomatic communication when talking about the gravity of some situations in our countries. If I talk about Tunisia, my own appreciation, and I think that is shared by both the World Bank and the IMF, is that the situation is really critical and is really very, very concerning, and it's a sort of concern for all of us. And I would like to see the leaders of both institutions telling our leaders and our people also on public opinion very clearly the gravity of the situation, how we should act, not only to reform, as used to say, but to transform completely our economies and our society. So I hope that we will be able to work together with both institutions and within the parliamentary network to hold our governments more accountable about this, this strong need to design a better future for our young people, and to be able to have this long-term perspective on the table, not only focusing on recovery on issues, crises and conflicts, and other more urgent things. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Honorable Zia Ladari. You asked our special guest not to be very frank, so I have a question that will request a diplomatic but frank answer. A question that comes from Hakima Belqasawi. And her question is, how do you assess the commitment of governments in relations to the recommendations of COP, especially considering that citizens are the ones affected by the negative repercussions of climate change? So globally, of course, we're not going to ask you country per country, but globally in the region, how do you assess the commitment of our governments?
May I? This is Jihad here.
Yes, go ahead, please.
Well, I think this is an issue that is gaining momentum, and I think parliaments, and I encourage our friends parliamentarians to scale up their work on that. I think here we are at a turning point. Climate issues are affecting our countries. And take only last year, several countries have faced flooding or droughts. Morocco, for example, has faced droughts. Sudan has faced flooding. And therefore, climate issues are there and are at the center of our inclusion. because they affect ruralities, they affect also the capacity to help the low-income groups. But also climate issues are issues of transformation and adaptation, and this would require investments. Yesterday, we had in Paris a meeting with the head of states from Africa, and some of the North African leaders were there. And the discussion was around this issue. And the idea was to mobilize $100 billion using SDRs and SDRs reallocation to promote this fast and sustainable transformation that would require policies, would require changing our way of living, and the issue of reducing through subsidy the utilization of fossil fuel resources are important, but this would require financing. And I think we need to expand what we have started for African countries to MENA countries. 3, we have also to take into consideration that some of our countries are oil producing, and the adaptation and the mitigation for them, especially with the carbon pricing, would require additional efforts. And here there is a plea. Let's think together in order to get the right strategies. And let's have a national and regional dialogue about these issues. And let's work together in order to improve the way we use our resources, starting from water to other type of very scarce resources, and to develop a strategy that would help the region, not only to adjust and adapt, but also use this big transformation to create a new, I would say, source of activities. This region is very active in energy production and management. Let's transform this into not only the fossil fuel energy, but also the renewable energy. We should look at this from not only the lens of this is something that is imposed on us. I think this is a priority, definitely, but also this is an opportunity. And the region has to seize this opportunity and use this transformation to accelerate the reforms, accelerate also the growth.
Thank you, Jihad. I have a last question for Farid from Morocco, Honorable Lazrek Noordin. Are the swift solutions to alleviate the crisis that areas like Gaza Strip are currently facing, where COVID-19 repercussions are met with other difficulties, such as violence, leading to a double crisis?
Yeah, no, thank you. Very, very important question. Let me first say one word on the issue of COP. We need to find the right incentives. And the right incentives are economic incentives right now. So for instance, I look at the EU. The EU is putting together the Green Deal. Basically, everything that is going to be going into the EU over the coming few years will have to be stamped green. A couple of days ago, I was having a good discussion with my team on a very large project in the northeast of Morocco, the Nador project. The whole discussion is how to use that project as an open space vis-a-vis Europe, and how to green it so that it is an open space vis-a-vis Europe. This is one. Second, when we look at the economies, a large number of our countries, tourism plays a very important role. If there is one thing that would keep and attract even more tourism, clearly it is a clean environment. Third, we discussed it earlier, the issue of water. That is an absolutely existential issue in absolutely each one of the countries in the Middle East and North Africa. Water, critical water scarcity levels are there in absolutely every country in the Middle East of North Africa, apart from Iran and Iraq. So imagine each one of our countries is now in a situation of critical water scarcity. So there is a need for us to move on that. I will finish with the issues of renewables. Great job done in Morocco with Noor, great job done in Egypt with Banban. We have some interesting project in Jordan. We need to keep pushing that and help the countries diversify even more. On Gaza and what's happening, we have, as you know, an engagement in a large number of fragile states and states where that are unfortunately ridden with conflicts. What we are doing right now, what I mentioned earlier, I was on the call with my colleagues in Gaza. They are telling me that the only COVID equipped hospital with a laboratory, the only one in the whole strip, was bombed. So basically, 2 million people right now are in a situation where they have no access to any type of testing, any type of vaccination. The situation was already dire before, now it is 10 times more terrible and more dramatic. What we are trying to do in all of these countries, whether it is West Bank, Gaza, or whether it is Yemen, for instance, today, is to accelerate our commitment vis-a-vis financing some of their equipments, notably in Yemen right now, and obviously try to step up on vaccination. This will need to be done very fast. In some of those places, like Yemen, it is extremely difficult because of the way the country is being divided right now. And in Gaza, it is even more difficult because we are in the middle of an open war. But we are not lowering our guard, and we will be keeping to focus like a laser beam on trying to help the people on the ground.
Thank you, Farid. Thank you all for your questions and answers and contribution. And as I said in the introduction of this session, we have an artist, Zara Finastasi, that has been capturing our discussion during these almost 2 hours. And we will now discover through her drawings how our exchanges have inspired her, and we will see them on screen.
Yes,
Hello, Sarah.
I'm just getting it set up right now. Let's make sure you can see it. Okay, thank you for that introduction. Hi, everyone. My name is Zara Stasi, and as was mentioned, I was listening and visualizing the conversation so that you will have a takeaway, not only to remember this conversation, but to share with others on your teams and in your homes. So I wanted to start here with the question that brought us all together, which is how do we build inclusive, sustainable, and resilient recovery? And what was interesting about the introduction was, yes, we're talking about the COVID crisis, but the region that we're talking about has had deep conflicts and issues that haven't been resolved. So the fierce urgency of now, that quote that was shared at the beginning, takes on a new meaning because it's not just COVID that we are solving for, but many other regional conflicts and issues like joblessness, et cetera, climate change that we'll talk about as we go through. One of the ways that was brought up to address both COVID and these deep conflicts is building trust between people and the governments. And time again in this conversation, the idea of rewriting a social contract came up. And what that looks like is, from a government perspective, in that social contract, opening doors. But from a people's perspective, it's taking action once those doors are opened. So you see both of those things indicated there at a high level of what rewriting a social contract might look like. Additionally, the importance of partnerships and interregional collaboration, transparent policies, and the governance and rule of law to be included in those governmental and individual actions that come out of a social contract. Overall, the building of transparency and confidence in the governmental actions is really key and kind of paramount. So that kind of cuts across the bottom here. We then talked a bit about this moment and how it is a moment to accelerate transformation across a number of different pieces of government and industry. Also mentioned was not just planning for the next year and solving COVID and vaccine crises now, but looking and planning for about 5 to 10 years out in the future. And also keeping in mind, where are the global trends going? And are we as a region, addressing and meeting those trends and keeping up with those trends? One of the areas that was mentioned for accelerating transformation specifically was in tech and digitization. And specifically, we talked about how digitizing the government, health, and education services helps them be more equitable. Tech and digitization can be a way to train for future jobs and thinking about a green future as well. And digitization is one of the ways to build safeguards into fighting corruption. So those were all mentioned as far as ways to transform and accelerate using tech and digitization. We then talked a bit about the economy and jobs, and specifically talked a bit about how equitable vaccine distribution is something that facilitates economic growth. So that's something that has to happen first to help facilitate economic growth. But also, once that happens, things like tourism can open back up. And we also mentioned and talked through how giving more women access to the job market and specifically formalizing those informal economies is a way to reduce unemployment and accelerate growth. Another area of accelerated transformation was spoken about the green economy. And the green economy is specific to addressing the climate crisis that we're in now and using our resources like the youth of our countries, employing them to address that climate crisis of the future. This is also a mindset shift as far as building resilient infrastructure with the future in mind, rather than building, on old structures and old ways of the past. What was just mentioned towards the end of our call was maybe creating more of a regional strategy. So as a region, you're much more kind of connected with how you're addressing climate change, since it does affect your region very particularly with the types of problems and issues that may arise and get worse with climate change and crises. All of these things can be helped and bolstered by using the private sector. And that was a theme that came up quite a bit, specifically really leveraging and going and using different subsidies and different incentives to help the private sector help bolster these changes across tech and digitization, economy and jobs, green economy, and other ways to grow in the 5 to 10 years of the future. And lastly, one of the areas that kind of pulls this all together and comes up time and time again in the conversation was the importance of interregional collaboration. So this is not something that country by country, if everyone makes different plans, can be as effective as if folks come all together and have strategies as a region, have plans as a region. So that interregional collaboration and connection is really key to bringing all of this together. And with that, I'll hand it back to the team, and just know that you will receive this material so you can then review it and use it in your future work on these topics here. Thank you.
Thank you, Zara. Thank you very much. It's really very, very interesting. You just caught every important aspect of this conversation. I was about to wrap in a few minutes saying everything you just said. So I think I'm going to skip my closing remarks because it was so subtle, and also a delicate glance of artists on our work and our conversation. So we're approaching the end of this session, and I will therefore ask Jihad to conclude in 2 or 3 minutes, and then Farid, if you would like, please.
Thank you very much, Naila. I would not try to sum up because I think Zara did an excellent, outstanding job. Zara, you're not only creative, but I think you could apply, and you will be definitely recruited in one of our organizations. You have done a fantastic job. I would like to build on what, not what Zara showed us, but on what Zara represents to us. In previous incarnation, I used to work a lot on promoting the new economy, especially through startups, and then all these new tech activities. And since I joined the fund, whenever I visit the country, be it Morocco, Tunisia, Lebanon, of course, UAE or Bahrain or other places, there is, in fact, a community of youth that I would say think the same. And they have not only the same aspiration, but they have the same perspective about the future. They see the future in much brighter way than we do. They see the opportunities, and I would say they are working on them. And this is where our future is. We have a talented group of people. They know what they want. They have a lucidity on the situation. They see the good things, but also they see the challenges, but they have the aspiration. What needs to be done is to give them the access to finance, which is a priority, especially in a region that have the resources, but that doesn't have the means to provide those resources to those who could have a double-digit growth. We need to unify our language, and could be one of the avenues of regional cooperation. Instead of having the broad-based type of old model of cooperation, is to have a focused cooperation. 3, we need education. And I think if we want to aspire, we need to improve our education. And education is not only at school. We saw during COVID, we need to reformat many of us to work in new sectors. And therefore, education is going to be important. And this would require investing in the infrastructure for that, be it in technology, but also in the way we educate, in the way we build skills. Education is something that would open a huge horizon for us, huge horizon for very important labor force that will come to the market, huge opportunities to have citizens that will in fact build the future better than what they have inherited. My last plea is time is of an essence. We need to move very, very fast. The 2008 crisis taught us many things, but there is at least one that we should keep with us. If we delay the adjustment and we delay the recovery and we delay the reform, it will take us decades and it will create huge uncertainty on our social stability. Again, I think we had today an excellent discussion. Naila, thank you very much. You did a great job. And I would like to also thank the parliamentarians of the region for the work they do. The future is also going to be based on what they are going to develop as new legislation and the way they will control what the executive is doing. Thank you again.
Farid, can you say a few words?
Yes. So let me be very, very undiplomatic, since Ziad was challenging us on that. 1, parliaments are supposed to be adopting laws, right? We have, unfortunately, too many. What we need to do is really try to take a good look at all those laws that we have that deal with our economy. Take an audit, get rid of a lot of those, because you know what? Each one of those laws drags with it bureaucracy, constraints, state capture. We need to look at that. So parliamentarians, please take a rest. You don't need to be adopting laws all the time, but keep your governments accountable, because at the end of the day, you guys are accountable to us as well. So this is the first point. Second point, which was supposed to be the first one, but please, Zara, can you send us this as a poster? Because it would be really great to have this conversation we had captured in that beautiful, beautiful creation of yours. Third, issue of human capital. I think Jihad mentioned education. The bank 3 years ago, and Ziad mentioned it, launched the Human Capital Project. It's all about what? It's all about education, health, social protection. It's all about youth. And I really believe that this is the way forward. My own country, Tunisia, immediately after independence, spent more than 30% of its budget on education. We have reaped the benefit of it for generations. It's important, but the issue is not just money. The issue is how to spend it well. Because when I look at MENA, we are actually putting a lot of money behind education. The issue is that curricula are not good, and that the way the education is dispensed is not up to par. Fourth point, youth. Let me give you a story, a quick one. Last time I was in Algeria, I was talking to a number of startup kids. Amazing people, going around all of these issues related to frontiers being closed between Morocco and Algeria. They were doing tremendous stuff across the region. At the end, I asked them, what can the bank do to help? One answer: can you get the government off of our back? Leave us alone, because we can do it alone. We don't need government to put constraints behind us. So this is really, really important. Going back to the whole discussion about the role of the state in the economy, the way we should be looking at the new social contract, and the way we should be giving more space to the private sector and to the creativity of our young people. So thank you so very much. It was great. Naila, you did an amazing job. You know, next time I have something like this, I am hiring you. Thank you so much.
Well, if I listen to you, I have to back up from my parliamentarian work, so I'll have time. You're taking risks saying that, Farid. Thank you so much, Farid and Jihad. Thank you to the members of parliament panelists, to Dr. Saeed Naseri and Nasser Saidi, sorry, and to the organizing team, including Elizabeth from the IMF and Hannah, Serene, Blythe, T, and Amy, and Sholto, of course, from the World Bank. A special thanks to Honorable Liam Byrne, the chair of the Parliamentary Network, who has helped put together a virtual platform on which members of parliament can submit their articles to share experiences and insights, to share best practices among legislators. They can submit their ideas on the platform, web platform, parlinet.org. So thank you all. Stay safe. I look forward to seeing you again. Ma'as-salama. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.